What is up, y'all? It's your boy Anki coming at you with another review. My Hero Academia Chapter 347, chapter review, page by page. You already know how we do, so if you haven't read it already, you gotta go. This chapter picks up right where we left off, with Shigaraki being on the attack, trying his best to annihilate Bakugo and Mirko in one blow. We see him taking out multiple stages. We see Genis having to flee. We're taking down one of the UA towers already, starting off with a bang, letting us know that he is not to be messed with. Now, what I like here is that we immediately cut away to the Aizawa and Monoma team, and this is mostly because when you're these guys, you know, as far as you're concerned, you've set out to erase this guy's quirks. That's what you're supposed to be doing. Your quirk is active, and yet you see something that you would normally associate with somebody activating a quirk being utilized here with the Shigaraki's expansion of a bunch of hands. Now, when we cut to this, Edshot goes, is it not a quirk then? And Shigaraki says, this is simple growth, just my body on its own. And now, we talked about this with previous videos about how quirk singularity, especially last chapter, I talked about how if this is happening, it's likely him being able to utilize, at least to a certain degree, like that regeneration, that development of his body, without it technically being triggering a quirk. And this is kind of what we find out to be the case. It's more or less him being able to manipulate his body with extreme freedom. It's kind of similar to, like I mentioned, the heteromorphic quirks kind of always being on, but in addition to that, it makes this so that he's technically healing, but he's not healing. And this is clearly derived from Tetsuo Shima, from Akira. Even this field of UA being chosen is going to likely be leveled, as we already see it taking massive damage, so that by the time Deku gets there, it will be similar to the catastrophe and the disaster site that the Tokyo Olympics arena was in Akira, but in this case it'll be for UA being destroyed. Now, focusing in on that part about the growth, though, I do want to point out that Horikoshi had already alluded to this being a byproduct of achieving quirk singularity back during the Star and Stripe fight, because when she touched him and set that rule in place on his heart, if you remember, his hair suddenly grew longer, and that's when he started moving with a bit more confidence and like trying to really step forward. So you kind of see that this establishment of growth being a byproduct of reaching singularity, even when All For One had mentioned it back in the cave, this has been built up since throughout the entirety of this arc of Shigaraki reaching quirk singularity, that being his final goal to overcome, in addition to his struggle with the remnants of All For One, or vestige for one, within his mind. Now, what's worth noting is that during the explanation of this dialogue, we shift into the All For One perspective, talking more. This is definitely more vestige for one. And you can kind of tell, one, him having access to the information about the scientific experimentation and the planning by Dr. Garaki, and referring to him as such, as it seems like Shigaraki was never directly given the doctor's name. And when you think about the way that he addresses him, he always kind of refers to him as like doctor, whatever and Ujiko, you know, Dr. Garaki tells him to refer to him as Ujiko during My Villain Academia, and it just strongly suggests that Shigaraki was never given Dr. Garaki's name, which I guess you can consider that to be the real tip-off that he wasn't entrusted with a lot of what their actual plan was to develop these quirks, etc. So, and as he's explaining that, though, he shifts back into Shigaraki. And I want to give a lot of credit. We acknowledge Horikoshi for writing, and we acknowledge, you know, Caleb Kluck for doing his translations. And I do want to give some credit to John Hunt for the lettering in this chapter, because he made it a point to switch the fonts. If you look closely between pages 2 and 3, as All For One is explaining within Shigaraki the process of evolution and evolving, and them needing better bodies to be able to deal with the way quirks have been developing and mutating, and then we switch to you people who sweep it under the rugs, and as he's being belligerent and kind of talking about his ideals and why they need to be destroyed and don't understand what singularity is, it shifts back to this shaky, crumbly type of font with uneven letters at certain points to let you know that it's that Tomura voice that's back in dominance and in control. Just a nice touch on the design. And then, of course, we see that we have spare parts for Mirko's prosthetics. They factored in that there's a chance that they could be destroyed, so of course you set up for that, and that does make sense. And then she calls out Bakugo, referring to him as Dynamite, so all the heroes still actually calling him Dynamite, even if they don't use the entire epithet that he would like. But she calls him out for the team being formed again, that he's got to get his act together, but in reality it's a surprise ability from Shigaraki. He calls her out as much, and in addition to that, she's the one who ate like a face full of it, whereas it expanded into Bakugo's range and territory. Bakugo being a multi-range fighter, whereas she was close combat, it's kind of like, well, you kind of ran in there without even like trying to size up the situation. So why is she reprimanding him of all people? And of course, Jean is coming in, trying to be that voice of reason in the center, playing that role of like the leader of this group. And interestingly enough, it makes sense for Genis to be the leader in the sense that he's like the most popular, he's the highest ranked hero, but it just kind of seems jarring with what he's actually contributed to the hero side throughout the story. I talked about this last week how aggressively he was speaking to Shigaraki. It just came off as way too confident, but in addition to that, then it just, in general for me, Genis not being that heavy hitter, being injured, he's partially a liability in this situation. He's not going to be able to do as much, and he is very much reliant on Mirko, Edshot, Bakugo, Sun Eater, and Ejire, all people to, actually close out the fight for him in this instance. So I think the other characters kind of aware of it too when they're like, you want some. So yeah. And then of course Monoma is insistent that he is utilizing Erasure, and Midoriya makes contact with him, and he requests the warp, and we finally get the confirmation that what I talked about previously, Monoma can only activate one of the copied quirks at a time. Switching from Erasure to warp is going to take some time in addition to going back, and they can no longer afford to leave this battlefield, because now that Shigaraki's here, they cannot stop erasing his quirk, and Erasure apparently only works with both eyes, and nothing like Aizawa's body isn't offsetting the fact that he lost that eye, so he can't stop Shigaraki. And that 10 seconds is more than enough time for Shigaraki to kind of just blast away as much as he wants at these people. And with these hands being spread everywhere, the idea that any of them could propagate decay basically makes it where it's almost impossible for them to escape that decay radius, and for all of UA to almost guarantee to still be crumbleable before the end of this fight is over if his quirks are active, which means that Midoriya has to foot it to UA's Sky Fortress, or fly there, however you want to put it, so that he can hopefully get there in time to then somehow get through the barrier to then get in and face Shigaraki, which is why I'm thinking the barrier is going to have to come down. The whole point of setting these obstacles for, Shigaraki, who's very much written like a protagonist character in his own right, is for him to overcome them and for Deku to get in. So Deku being the reason he stays there, not the barrier at the battle for One for All coming to him. Basically making it where if the goal is here that Shigaraki will be contained by his own choice, not by any of the plans that the staff has set up. What that will mean for the hero side as far as losses go, whether it comes to the casualties, that's a whole separate discussion technically. But I certain people like Genis I don't see coming through this. He's kind of one of those characters that it kind of feels like it's his time. But we'll see. We'll see. Now, the important thing here is that when we cut away to where Deku is, what I like about this is we get the explanation that Deku is 200 kilometers away. Now, for those of you who have been keeping up with the story, and for those of you who have watched the streams, you already watched me cover this math, but I'm going to cover it again here real quick, because during Camino arc, All For One specifically mentions how, it took you 30 seconds to get here, and from the time I sent the Nomu over there, and they're about 5 kilometers away, and he talks about how All Might's slowing down, but assuming that Deku can at least match the speeds of, Camino All Might, then that would be 5 kilometers every 30 seconds, or 10 kilometers a minute, which would chop down to 20 minutes to do 200 kilometers. But we would also factor in that during that time frame, All Might fought and defeated 4 Nomu, and in addition to that, spoke to and coordinated with a couple of other heroes before deciding to head out. And in addition to that, did take a moment to freak out and scream and stuff because of the idea of him like losing Bakugo. So you could argue that that 5 meters was actually covered a bit faster, and if that's the case, then you could say that, let's say he did 5 meters in 20 seconds, and that would be 15 meters per minute. Then you did 150 meters within 10 minutes, so you'd be around that 14-15 minute range. Similarly, though, you could even say, well, maybe the fighting and the talking took the longest part. Maybe it only took like 10 seconds, 30 kilometers per minute. And if you have something like 30 kilometers per minute, then he's getting there in less than 10. But the idea is that depending on what rate you want to look at it and you want to apply the mathematics, there's a margin that regardless, we're looking at on the high end 200 minutes of them waiting for Deku to get there because of faux Fajin, or because of like faux 100% using Fajin and doing all this other stuff. And in general, his percentage should be higher than 45% now, like his base running and being able to move. So with that in mind, like if he kind of goes plus ultra and does some extra stuff, maybe around like a 60% full cowling plus float to fly and Fajin stacking up, then we could see him cutting down that wave even faster. But that whole this is 200 kilometers away. We know All Might was able to cover 5 kilometers in at least 30 seconds. So we know that at longest, if he's supposed to be matching up to All Might, it should take him 20 minutes, not counting like different battles. And because he's going to have these battles, I'm likely expecting him to go faster, potentially even having to go past Camino to get to this battlefield. That we'll wait and see about, though. That's just the math section of this chapter. Now, one of the things I like about this Nomu is that it seems to have a quirk similar to Tokage, and has the ability to separate its body but also elongate those pieces. So they're stuck fighting like this massive AoE. This is just as messy as some of the, and by messy I just mean like active and chaotic, as some of the war arc spreads already. And this was one of the battlefields that I figured would be tamer. But then when you have characters like Moonfish coming out, pulling out all their teeth and doing all these attacks, and you have these giant Nomu with the flying ones, you have just chaos everywhere. And Deku and Uraraka communicating, understanding that the shockwave is reaching the back line, like they gotta do all this other stuff, and Sue's mostly just talking so that we can see that Sue is here this chapter and remind everybody that Sue is around. Confirming Sirius into the story, completely canon, makes that episode in season 2 100% no longer, you can't call it filler. She spent time with Selkie. You could argue that would also make the Uraraka episode in season 5 also canon. That was build up towards these arcs, because if you remember, that was part of their, they fought the drug traffickers or whatever. That was supposed to be like the movie tie-in while she was with Selkie. So, or bring it back. So now we know for sure, whether you like it or not, those 2 episodes in season 2 and season 5 respectively, tying together Selkie, Uraraka, and Sue's time together, all canon right here as of this particular manga chapter. This is no longer negotiable. This is why I always say that My Hero Academia kind of functions similar to the MCU in that there's an MHA universe story, and then there's a My Hero Academia manga canon, and you can absorb the manga without watching or consuming the other aspects of the series, but those things can come into play, or those dynamics can matter when approaching the manga. Just like, for example, the underground shafts that were discovered in one of the School Briefs novels that ended up being something of a safety measure that Nezu had set up for UA that we got revealed in the manga way later. So, now, with this setup though, we get, after them, dealing with the fact that the battlefield is already immediately descended into chaos, Toga makes her move on Deku, and once again, Danger Sense does not go off. And we talked about this way back before, even before the Deku versus Class 1A had happened on this channel. I had talked about on one of the streams how Bakugo would be capable of potentially not setting off Danger Sense while looking for Deku while he was out alone, because his goal would be to save Deku from his isolation and bring him back. And then sure enough, when we got the fight of Deku versus Class 1A, nobody set off Danger Sense. And now similarly, we have here, one of the shortcomings of the quirk is that it cannot activate against somebody who is not necessarily holding malice against you in their attack. And so, because like the idea is that there's no hostility, so there's no danger. And what that also does is to make it where Danger Sense is not going to protect him from incidental bullets or harm either. And that's another thing that's worth noting. If he is not the direct target of something, Danger Sense in theory won't protect him because there is no malice aimed at him. So there's a couple of holes in Danger Sense, which is kind of a good thing. We're getting a reason for it to not be overpowered. But then what it also does is that because she's not a threat to Izuku, he can now sit here and look at her, and as they discuss these ideas, as they discuss how Toga wants him to be her boyfriend, and how she just loves him, and she loves Ochako, and she loves Sue, and she wants to be friends with Sue, and loves them, and wants to become them. As they have that discussion, he can know that she's being sincere. And when we had that previous discussion about how they maybe should try to find a way to save Toga, this now opens the door for these characters to actively try to, and with good cause and justification, try to reach out and try to save her. Toga is in a position that is very unique here, where because her Quirk has altered her personality and her perspective and the way that she interacts with, and essentially what is, her normal, as has been discussed in the series, she's effectively just somebody who is neurodivergent. Her way of interacting with the world is just different. And the quirk of Danger Sense is basically telling Deku, this isn't her trying to hurt you for real. It's her expression of love. It just so happens that her expression of love leads to pain. And it's getting her to understand that while you may want to feel that way about somebody, causing people physical harm is bad, and you need to not hurt people, but maybe come to another agreement that's a bit more mutual and respectful. That is hopefully a path that they can open up with her and maybe be a bit more adjusted. That doesn't mean that it will work, but that's kind of the idea. And I think that's where the line will be kind of drawn, because she'll want to take all their blood, and that won't be a real option. And then that's when it'll just have to come down to a fight. And obviously I could see Toga trying to more or less appeal to Ochako's mutual love of Deku, effectively handling the battlefield confession aspect of this for Ochako. But to that same degree, what I would see then is Deku being dismissed from the battlefield at that point, and Ochako and Toga having their final one-on-one conflict, maybe with Sue getting involved for whatever reason, but hopefully Sue can get her own conflict brewing in the background. So yeah, that's kind of where I see this Toga thing, like her maybe trying to appeal to Ochako for disrupting this war, because just like during the Paranormal Liberation War raid arc, they had that moment where she was like, you took the time out of my day in the middle of all of this to ask me that question. You took the time out of my day to ask me if what I want to do to you. I have way more important things to do right now. People are dying. And so we have the ability to come back to what was missed in that moment. And for Ochako to open up about how she's been thinking about Toga, because Toga will like the idea of hearing that. That doesn't mean that the battlefield is just going to end. It could mean Toga tries to help them out. It could mean that Toga unleashes twice his blood. We don't know where that twice his blood plot is going to go either. And so what we could get is this base effectively seeming wrapped up, and us seeming like we have a victory here and maybe somewhere else on the map and somewhere else on the map, and then we find out Toga already drank twice his blood, and then that's how we get the Sad Man's Parade kicking off after she's been caught and defeated, and this whole area has been shut down. That's kind of how I could see that one going out, and but that, again, whether or not we go that route kind of depends on how much stuff Horikoshi has planned out and how much of it he's really thought about its length, or how long it'll actually take to properly execute. Because this could be like Sports Festival, where he ended up doing a little over double the chapters he originally planned, in which case this I have one more year to do would be he actually has 2 years, and that might actually create some room for the Sad Man's Parade stuff and make it so that it all hits a nice pace. We'll see what happens. I don't know the future, and that's okay with me about this one. I've been enjoying My Hero Academia, where it's been going lately. Hope you have too. Let me know what you guys think about this chapter and how you've been feeling about the events just in general, how they've been unfolding. What are your big concerns? What are you looking towards and hoping to see more of out of the story? Let me know down below. Leave a comment. Make sure you like, subscribe. Always come around for more content, and see you actually this Friday for probably another review, since the chapter is dropping early, but it may be an episode of the Church of MHA. We will see. I'm Anaki, and I am out.